Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us in this online conversation. This is part of our master program in global studies in a joint initiative together with S Global, our partner, directed by Cristina Manzano, that will continue with the presentation. I will talk very briefly because the important thing today is to listen to our guests. We can say that we have a very high quality array of speakers, and also that we could combine expertise. People have been working many years in some of the most important institutions. We have also a reputed scholar and a colonel from the Spanish Air Forces. So without further ado, I will leave the podium now to Cristina. And as far as we are talking, you could take notes. And at the end, we have a discussion, a conversation, and debate that hopefully will be enriching for all of us. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Francisco. My name is Cristina Manzano. As Paco said, I'm the director of S Global. And first of all, I want to thank the Embassy of the United States in Spain for this collaboration. Together, we are launching today this project on how we can contribute to a better knowledge and understanding by the Spanish society, starting by all of you, the young people, the students, about the worlds of security, the challenges to our common security and defense. As you know, this project has two pillars. One is this debate and the other debates that will follow. And the other one is a competition in which you are all invited to participate. We want you to tell us what are the challenges and how you understand and you face those challenges for our common security. You have all the rules of the competition in S Global. We've shared with you the rules. If you have any doubt, you can always contact us and we'll try to solve those problems, questions, and so on. But I really invite you to compete. You know that there will be a prize per university. The prize will be a trip to Brussels, to the headquarters of NATO and other important security offices there for you to understand it better. So you are all invited and looking forward to all your proposals. Today, as you also know, we will be speaking about the future of war. And well, sorry, I thanked the Embassy of the United States in Spain for this collaboration, but of course, I also want to thank the University of Salamanca for this collaboration. As I mentioned, this is being done together with different universities throughout Spain. And the first one, the kicking off of this project is this one with the University of Salamanca and the global studies area. As I was saying, this debate will deal with the future of war. And for that, we have three very interesting and different speakers. First of all, we have Jean Towson, who's a senior fellow of the Transatlantic Security Program at the Center for a New American Society. He has a long career in NATO, in Pentagon, in the Atlantic Council, dealing with transatlantic security and relations, and it's a pleasure to have you here, Jean. We also have Montse Huguet. She's a professor of History of International Relations and director of the Institute of International and European Studies, Francisco de Vitoria, at the University Carlos III in Madrid. And she's also written a number of books, of course, a big number of academic papers, and she's worked on the relationship between Spain and the US. And we also have Angel Gómez de Agreda. He's a colonel, as Francisco mentioned, at the Spanish Air Force. He's an expert in geopolitical analysis and author of Mundo Orwell, Manual de Supervivencia para un Mundo Hiperconectado. This book obtained the award of the best business book in Spanish in 2019 with the No Square Award. I'll stop here because the interesting part of this is listening to our speakers, and I'll give the floor first to Jean Towson. Just let me remind you, you will be more than welcome to post questions via the chat. We will be taking questions at the end of the session, trying to combine your curiosity and need to understand better. But this is a conversation, as Francisco said. We don't want just to be speaking the four of us, the five of us. So please, you students that are on the other side of the screen, feel free to participate, to make questions and comments. And without further ado, Jim, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina, very much. And thank you to all the colleagues, including the U.S. Embassy and Salamanca and all the others who are putting on this, this event. When I was in the Pentagon, I was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, and I was in charge of Europe and NATO. And so I worked very hard on the U.S.-Spanish defense relationship. I went to Madrid a couple of times, and I tried to work with our Ambassador Costos at the time to do something similar between U.S. think tanks and Spanish think tanks or universities. And I just didn't have enough time to do it. So I was thrilled to hear this is happening. And I am more than happy to help out anytime to do this. This is just a wonderful thing. So we're here to talk about the future of war. And I have 7 minutes to talk about the future of war. I'm gonna make 4 points very quickly and then turn it over to the experts who are going to give you a better idea of the future of the war. But I think my opening point to everyone is that I'm a practitioner. And what that means is I spent 30 some odd years in the Pentagon primarily, but also at NATO, working not necessarily on the future of war, although I did work on that a little bit, and I'm going to talk about that, but really dealing with war as it came upon us, or conflict. I guess defining what war is something else that could take a few hours. But I wanted to make the point to everyone that I'm not an academic, and I which I was many times. I do teach. I teach a course at Sciences Po over Zoom, and I've taught at American University here. And it's a wonderful profession that I probably should have gone into myself. So I salute the academics on here, and in my next life, I'll be one of you. But I spent 30 years in the garden, if you will, doing this. And these are 4 points that I came away with in thinking about the future of war. And the first point is that I'm focused on the word future here, is that we don't know the future. And I know that's an easy point to make, and that's a typical practitioner's point. But I make that because, and I'm really going to refer here to the United States and the Pentagon and how we go about our work. There are a lot of people, certainly in the national security world here in Washington, that think they can predict the future. And they write lots of books, and I've been asked to write chapters on that, and I just refuse because you don't know what the future is going to hold for you. And when you're a practitioner, that's very difficult. I'll give you an example. When I was at NATO, I was a defense planner, and as a defense planner, myself and my colleagues, our job was to try to figure out for NATO what we thought the future threats were going to be. And based on that, what did we want each ally to bring to NATO in terms of military capability to handle that threat? So we were quite busy, and this is between 1998 and 2002. And I can tell you, in those 4 years of trying to predict the future of war, we were wrong every time. Every time we were wrong. We didn't predict 9/11. We didn't predict the rise of ISIS, or that NATO would be having an air campaign over Libya. And where that would take us. We didn't predict a lot of things. And so what we were trying to tell allies they needed to have in terms of military capability to bring to NATO, frankly, was based on what we had seen before. You know, it was just recalling the old aphorism about you prepare for the last war. And unfortunately, because we can't predict the future, we fall upon what has happened before and what could happen. But the important thing here is that you have to guard against hubris, because you will always get it wrong. It's like Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld used to talk about the unknown unknowns. Well, they are quite a big player. And so predicting the future of war is very, very difficult. I will say also that there's a difference between predicting and then actually taking action. And then there's a difference between predicting and planning. If you look back in history, there are plenty of people who predicted World War II. They predicted Pearl Harbor. They predicted the end of the Cold War. There's a lot of people who predict it. And that's all great. And they can write a book and claim credit for that. But that doesn't help, because making a prediction doesn't mean you're actually planning to deal with what you've predicted. Planners might hear of those predictions, but it's up to the planners to figure out, is that prediction, what are the probabilities that that person making the prediction is correct or not? And as I pointed out earlier, many times those planners say, well, that prediction is just, that's crazy. Airplanes running into the Twin Towers is not going to happen. And so they're not planning for that. So there's predictions, and then there's planners who come up with probabilities and risks, and then try to plan for what they think is the most probable, and many times fall short. Another point to make also is there's a difference between whether it's a prediction or what a planner says to the bosses is going to happen. And many times the important point there is the bosses, if you will, seeing that prediction or looking at those probabilities and risks and actually doing something. And I'll tell you, the illustration for that is in our newspapers today here in Washington, is that in terms of the intelligence community, which does more than predictions, they make educated guesses. But the intelligence community told the Capitol Hill police and others through the FBI that there was going to be an assault on the Capitol. They came up with that a day before, but action wasn't taken. 9/11 also was something that we knew, we had the intelligence that something along those lines was going to happen. Action wasn't taken. So again, in looking at the future of war and looking at the future and predicting the future, it's more than making predictions. It's more than making risk assessments based on probabilities. There's also the need for action to be taken. Or what good is a prediction, except to be a good title for your book that you write, that you had seen this happening and no one was listening to you. My last point is this on the defense planning and predicting, is that once you get into an action, predicting how that action, that conflict is going to end is very difficult. I will tell you, as we did Iraq and Afghanistan or the Balkans, no one predicted that we would be still on the ground this many years later. So it's not just what's the future of war, but what's the future of the conflict in which you are in. That's another difficult thing to predict, and normally we get it wrong. The second point is this: deterrence is the key to dealing with this. You have to deter an unknown. As I said, you can have a defense planner who comes up with risk assessments and probabilities, and you can plan what you need to tell the allies to bring to NATO in order to deter what you think that risk is going to be. So at the end of the day, because you don't know if your prediction is going to be true or not, you need to be strong and structured to handle those unknown unknowns that are out there. If you, in terms of deterrence, for it to be a credible deterrent, to keep those risks at bay, it's a deterrent that's got to be something that's nimble and able to handle all those unknown challenges and conflicts that come your way. If you are stovepiped and you're only looking at one future, then you're gonna be like with 9/11. You're going to be all prepared for the thing that doesn't happen. So that's the thing about deterrence, which is so important to keep the peace, is how do you make deterrence credible when you don't know what the future is going to hold? The third thing is resilience. That's the point I wanted to make, and I call it resilience in the gray zone. And I know my colleagues are going to talk about the gray zone in a minute. But as I look at the future of war, so much of what we're talking about at NATO and in capitals is hybrid war. You know, we're talking about the hybrid war. We're talking about the gray zone. We're talking about, it's got a lot of different names based on what's happened in the past. And that's okay. Crimea taught us that the next war may not look like tanks crossing a border or the invasion of Georgia, you know, by the Russians earlier on. At CNN showed armored vehicles going in. That's not what the Russians decided to do when they went into Crimea. It was different. They came in and with little green men, and we'll talk about how they did it. That is not new. What they did isn't necessarily something new to warfare. So when you're looking at the future of war, that's not necessarily something that is something brand new for planners. It was under other names in the past, all the way to the the Trojan horse and the Greeks. I mean, this is something that is not necessarily new, but planners are saying we're going to see more of this, and if we're going to see more of this, and whether it looks like it's in the form of cyber, it's in the form of misinformation. If we're going to see more of this, we've got to have a society and institutions that are more resilient to this. Because while this is an old method of warfare, in terms of looking at the future as best we can, based on the past, we know that we need to have societies that recognize this and can deal with this. In the United States, we have seen our society and our democratic processes undermined by Russia, through, if you will, a hybrid war technique, something in the gray zone. We see misinformation, we see hacking, we see a lot of things, and not just in the United States, but throughout Europe as well. And we have to understand that that this is going to be something that all of society needs to be hardened to be able to deter against. And it goes back to deterrence. The stronger the resilience, the stronger the deterrence. And at the end of the day, it's that deterrence that we need to have. The final point is this. One tool that we have that has become more and more important, and as someone, as I said, who has worked with NATO since 1990, beginning with the end of the Cold War, what we have in a strong and unified transatlantic community is absolutely critical in this day, particularly as we deal with not just threats like the gray zone threats, but dealing with pandemics as well, and dealing with a lot of things that can cause the unity of the transatlantic community to weaken, to be attacked by those that would do us ill. We know that to deal with China and to deal with Russia, both of those nations being very different when it comes to the challenges they pose, we have to have a strong, unified NATO. We have to have a strong and unified transatlantic community and a strong, unified Spanish-U.S. relationship to work together to deal with these challenges, to deter Russia. If you're in the Baltic nations, you want very much for that strong deterrence to be there. To deter China and what they might have in mind when it comes not just to Asia, but to other places as well, as they use their own tools, different from the Russians, but their own tools to deal with the West and to try to have leverage over the West. So I'm going to end there with those 4 points, and I'm happy to talk about them later. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, certainly we will go back to some of your points later, because you've raised a lot of interesting and necessary issues to be understood and to be discussed by all of us. But now I'm giving the floor to Montse, who's going to talk about the past and the future. I mean, the past, which leads to the future of women in this field, which is sometimes forgotten when we talk about conflict. More and more so it's not, but we need to understand where it comes from. We are trying to share just some slides here with some pictures.
I think they are already.
Okay, so Montse, the floor is yours.
Montse, you have to turn on the.
Yeah, now my
Thank you.
my voice is now. Okay, thank you so much. You can hear me? Yes? Yes, you can hear me. Thank you so much, you all. Okay, well, I'm trying to adjust my participation to the minutes I was given. So first of all, of course, thank you the organization for having me here, for giving me the opportunity, and for me it's a pleasure to share with the other participants and of course with the students. Well, I'm trying to talk about women at wars, thinking about the future of war, but coming from the past, because the position of women in wars, you know, now it's a very important point in the studies in history, contemporary history studies, but it's difficult to understand the different questions in which women have participated in wars in other times. Well, I'm trying to give you some general ideas. First of all, first one is female fighting, the violence deliberately chosen by women. This a theoretical point in modern times. Many questions are being raised about how to fight for and against different causes. There have been many examples of women resisting, fighting in a peace manner against destructive policies, for example, extremism, nuclear power, or environmental crisis, gun legislations. Okay, many causes, of course, and that means that women have always chosen causes to fight against, as well men have done. But what happened, or what has happened, when women choose a literal fight, entering an army, for example, or going to war? Okay. In the early 20th century, boys chose to join European or American armies at wars. And of course, propaganda and many kinds of different motivations pushed these boys to enroll. Women, however, faced enormous societal disquiet, scrutiny, often penalty, if they got too close to the violence. Popular culture has raised a wall between women and violence, domesticity and war, unless the violence had to be used to directly protect home, children, justified by a self-defense. So, historically, popular culture has accepted a sort of dogmas. I think these dogmas can be resumed in three points. Women are inherently more visible than males. Second, their nature, women's nature, make them not capable to be good soldiers. The third one is that women serving on the front line create anxiety, discontent, and this situation. In consequence, as women do not understand the nature of violence, how to use or administrate it, as conflicts regulates interactions between societies and nations, women are not capable to be in charge, mostly when conflicts threaten with a war. They are not capable to command armies. These are the traditional, of course, I'm not talking about today, but these are the traditional ideas. The model of fragile women is universal. Women as victims at wars. The traditional image of women at wars is that they are fragilized by their own nature, by the circumstances. They are the object of men's wild and coward behaviors, being raped, tortured, killed, used as symbols of fragility in the enemy ranks. And of course, history shows the brutality against women at wars. That is only the extension, the amplification of traditional brutality against women. Hurting women, the enemy hurts the motherhood, I underline this word, the motherhood of the nations. This is the usual creed, the traditional creed. Another point is has been the roles women has had in wars. These traditional roles have been keeping the home fire burning, for example, in a real and in a metaphorical sense, supporting the military efforts with domestic work. The third one is taking care of injured men in the nursing positions near the front lines, trenches, especially in the second half of the 19th century. Of course, we are going to the First World War. That is the beginning of a new era in the relationship between women and the warfare, because of the reinforcement of the presence at the assistential work in the Second World War, and because of women have a crucial presence in the new home front. Remember, the home front is built with the tools given by the new warfare economy, politics in many countries during this war. In the 4.5 years of this war, the militarization of women did not happen, even though many of them were permitted to dress in khaki, a very nice expression, to dress in khaki, with some kind of military uniform. Paid this uniform by women that wanted to be dressed in khaki. It was very important for them, this position, unlike what happened with men. Men did not have to pay the uniforms. Then when women kept away from the trenches, but the accelerated development of long-range artillery in the First World War and the air power meant that in the later years of the war, even the base camps and hospital city were no longer safe places. They were zones very, very dangerous for women. Well, there were created auxiliary services for women in UK, United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, etc. There are many photographs, archives about all this, the living of women in wars. In this photo, you can see here, you have an example, a very nice example, very well known in armies. Sorry. Is the example of the Battalion of Death, the Russian Battalion of Death, led by Maria Boskareva, created by the provisional government in 1917, whose history is very, very interesting. We have not the time to enter in it, but is one of the most important episodes in the First World War, referring women. In America, in the US, of course, we had the Geomen in the US Navy, or the Hello Girls. They are crucial at the end of the war as telephone operators with the Persian troops. And it's a very nice point. Well, in fact, women have been soldiers at wars. We have to remember the historian Margaret Macmillan, the the academic woman that has studied the world and humanity in many ways, and women and wars. And this historian has talked about women's exclusion from armies, from the institutions, as a commonplace. Well, there have been a very small percentage of warriors, women warriors at wars. Maybe we have stay here in these images. Paco, do not go forward. Stay please here. We will see in a minute why. But before, remembering that women had at wars different roles in physical combat, technology, diplomacy, intelligence, ammunition industries, espionage, and of course in this home front, recently very well studied and marked as the core of the female effort in years. But actually, all these cases are exceptions. As they are exceptions, one can think females have demonstrated they are capable at combat, but society have behaved in a despotic way with them, denying women the right to defend their countries or the right to show themselves as violent persons as they are. No, trying to finish with this exposition. It's very important to understand that the legacy of women about wars is very short, and that because female warriors are also out of historical documentation or artistic representations in history. In many words, there are no records on girls volunteer recruiting or their presence in battles. I'm remembering the American Civil War. It is an extraordinary case about she soldiers, women in war, but not enough studied. They have not been seen. They have not been honored. They have not been commemorated till nowadays that we are making the work of this representation. Just trying to understand with this photo, we have here at right Emmeline Pankhurst, the suffragette women that believed in the role of women at war, and this is very strange in a time, the beginning of the 20th century, in which suffragettes did not want women to be associated to anything related with violence. That is strange. Okay, just finally, we have to ask, why do people still struggle with the idea of female warriors nowadays in the future wars? As the word soldier may bring to mind a man in uniform, but it actually refers to anyone serving in the military, including women. And this book we have here in the presentation, written by Joshua Goldstein, talk about war and gender. You see the image is perfect. Try to understand the popular image of women in relation with armies. You see, so I brought this photo for the impact it may have in our minds. And Joshua Goldstein refers in this book that in the present times, a study it has been studied, and that the presence of women in armies along all the history is about 1%. 1% of soldiers in history has been women in history. Some dates, some figures, percentages finishing in my presentation. More or less, in China, we have nowadays 5% women at armies, India 3%, US about 15%. For example, South Korea about 15%, Russia 10%, Spain 13%, more or less. After UK, Netherlands, France, and Great Britain, though Spain has had a good work in this point. It's an army, Spanish army has had a good work with the women the last decades, from 1999, when Spanish women could have this kind of combat in ground combat. I think it is the name it is used. And North Korea, the last figure, 40% of women in army. And that's all. Okay, yes, the question is open: the past, the present, the future. Of course, as Jim has said in the beginning of this conversation, and I did like a lot the observation he did about the chance factor. I don't know if in English is the correct expression, the chance, the random factor, the unknown factor, because this is the core in history. In history, we try to understand what happened, not only with the classical factors, but the chance, it is important. Okay, that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Monse, for giving us this overview of women and war in the past. I will ask you later about your opinion of women and the army or the future of war. But now let's move with Angel to what is the gray zone and the impact of technology and new technologies in this area, and war, conflict, and so on. Angel, please, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Cristina. Thank you to Es Global. Thank you to the U.S. Embassy in Spain. And thank you to the University of my hometown, Salamanca. I'm very, very happy to be here. And thank you to all the students. I see there's people from all around, and it is very exciting to be sharing a few thoughts on the future of warfare. I'm trying to make sense of warfare, but the nature of war doesn't change. It's been the same throughout history. We are changing the way we make war. We are changing the way we fight, but the nature of war remains basically the same. And the fact that we have new ways of fighting war doesn't mean we are going to lose or we're going to abandon the old ways. The Amaras or the Fulani in Mali are fighting as we were in the Neolithic, in prehistoric times. These days, I mean, even if we advance, even if we create new weapons, new ways, or new forms of war, we will still be using the old ones. Well, I'm talking here on my personal capacity, not as an Air Force officer, but I'm halfway through between the military and the academic field. I'm about to finish my PhD thesis on engineering, on the ethics of AI. So that's why I'm bringing here these topics. And you know what? I think that the evolution of war these days is that wars used to be fought out in the battlefields. then we had, as Jim mentioned, 9/11, for example, or Kosovo. They brought war among the people, and now more and more we are fighting war within the people. So war is an ongoing process. It is not something that happens from today until 4.5 years later. No, it is an ongoing process. It's happening all the time. It is very insidious, and it is happening inside us. It's happening, I wouldn't say so much in our hearts and minds, but in our hearts specifically, because they don't target your reasoning, they target your emotions. Even when they use kinetic weapons, even when they use missiles, even when they kill or destroy, sometimes the aim, the objective, it is not to destroy or to kill. It is to bend your will. It is to bend your mind to their will. So what we are seeing these days is a very high tempo war. Things happen very quickly, only subject to the availability of logistics, to the capability of logistics to cope with the tempo. And we more and more see what we perceive as unfinished wars. So like, we call a truce, or we stopped here, but there's not a winner or a loser, a clear winner or loser. So we keep the war kind of in a standby, because what we want to create is enough instability, or to have the resources, the leverage to create instability. Why? Because of what Jim mentioned, resilience. What we are trying to do is to survive this constant aggression that we are suffering. So war is going to be permanent. War is not going to be in the front line. War is going to affect each and every one of you. Women are going to be within war because they are going to be targeted. Clausewitz mentioned the armed forces, the government, and the people. And the people are the target today, because what they want to do is to disconnect all these three parts of the triangle of government, of a nation. They're trying to break our resilience. They are going to be below the threshold of war. So most times we are going to be suffering aggressions that are not going to escalate into a full-blown war. Why? Because it is more sustainable. So what we are going to have is probably use of smaller weapons, small caliber. We are going to have more scalable weapons that we can use to kill one person or 1 million persons if you use enough of them. So we are seeing, I'm more worried about micro or nano drones than large drones, because they create a different kind of terror, and they are more fluid, and they are more difficult to defend against. So what we need to build is that resilience, having in mind that the threat is going to be very fluid. So our defenses have to be very fluid at the same time. The high tempo is going to be managed through AI, through artificial intelligence, and through a very well coordinated military. And that is the reason that we have different structures for peace and war. And that is the reason that when we are facing these, what I call exponential threats, and exponential threats are cyber threats, but it's also pandemics, or it's also climate change. And we don't see them coming. We see them as a flat threat, and then all of a sudden it escalates, and then it is too late for us to address them. So we need to build, first of all, the ability to see them coming, and then the ability to cope with them as they grow, and to mitigate their effects as much as we can. They're going to be deniable. So we are not going to openly attack the others. We are going to do it in a very superstitious way. I think it is going to be more than ever a clash of wills. So we are going to target people. We're going to target organizations. And in that sense, I believe that we are in a very good position. We in the Western world, we in the democratic world, because we are less resistant than autocracies, than dictatorships are, but we are more resilient because we are used to debating. We are used to having to engage and to having to deal with everyday threats. So I believe that we will prevail because of our resilience, although that will mean that we will be hit many times and we will have to survive and to adapt to those threats. As for women, I have to say that fortunately, I agree with the last part of what Professor Huguet said regarding women and the job the Spanish military has done in the last few years. If I was wearing my uniform, in my badge, it will be showing the Agre, my second name. It will be showing A positive. It will be showing 3 stars as a full colonel. And it will be showing Air Force. Exactly the same as if my first name was Anna or Pilar or any other female name. So for us, all that matters is the information in that badge, which tells you what your name is, how can I help you if you get hurt, and what you know what to do. How can you help me? What is your specialty? So I think that we are all soldiers today. Unfortunately, we are all going to be soldiers in this cognitive war that we are going to, and our democracies are better positioned to win this war than autocratic regimes. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, Angel. You've also offered a great overview of challenges and opportunities there too. Let me try to ask you some questions to continue this conversation. I'm going to pick up some points that each of you made, and again, please feel free to intervene, to comment. I'd like to start with the description that Jean made about how planners, how predictions don't match what planners plan. We have the capacity to see, I'm not sure to see the future, but at least to see different scenarios, but then to link that to real action is not that clear, it's not that linear. And I wanted to ask you, why is that so? Is it because our building capacities are not ready for those coming threats, whatever they may be it 9/11 terrorism, domestic terrorism, international ISIS, and so on, be it pandemics, as Angel just mentioned, whatever. Why is this match on the one hand? And linked to that, and again, this will be a question to all of you, what is the profile for the professionals in the security realm that we need for the future? Jim, first, please.
Well, thank you for that question, and it's a great one. I think hubris. It's really the problems where you can't get the symmetry between planners who are looking at a problem, looking at scenarios, looking at a threat, coming up with probability, coming up with how do you handle risk assessment on this, putting together a product and providing it to the chain of command, if you will. I think, and then that chain of command has to accept this or reject this or decide to take action or not, or something along those lines. I think a lot of this the problems that come with this is human nature. I use the word hubris. A lot of this is human nature, and human nature isn't just full of people who are blinded by their hubris, by their pride, by ignorance. It's not necessarily just that. A lot of it is also not enough time to make a good judgment, or external factors like politics or personality conflicts, particularly bureaucratic politics. There are so many reasons why something that a wonderful assessment made by planners, as it goes into the process, it is the right decisions and the right actions are not taken. There's so many reasons why. And if you look at, again, what happened here in Washington on Capitol Hill, and that complete breakdown of security, allowing the mob into the Capitol building, you will see so many different elements that contributed to this not working out the way it should, based on the FBI report that came in. So I think it's really human nature and chance and luck. There's a lot of factors out there that come in and cause that to happen. That doesn't mean you throw your hands up and say, well, we just shouldn't do anything then, because all those factors come into play. You can't do that. I mean, it's not all the time that you have the wrong decisions made. But I think, going to your last part of your question, that's now the role of the intelligence analyst, the action officer, the political appointee, talking about the American system, the Secretary of Defense, who's a political appointee, or the intelligence analyst, or the planners, who are usually civil servants or intel professionals or military planners. You know, it comes to how you put into those jobs and how you pick political appointees to be secretaries of defense or whatever the job might be. It's their understanding of the nature of what is being given to them, that the intel analyst has got to do as best a job as they can to keep their own hubris under control. You know, they've got to be able to come up with a dispassionate set of proposals based on intelligence that is then sent up the chain of command. And those making the decisions, the political appointees in our democracy, they need to understand too that they have got to guard against undue influence from their boss or from politics or the press, and focus on the job at hand and make the best decision that they can. They may be wrong, but they may be right. But if they're wrong and they make the wrong decision based on these external actions that they should have known better, that's when history judges them as being a tragic figure, making decisions in a wrong way because they allow themselves to be captured by other things. And so those are just some reflections on what you have asked.
Thank you. Angel wanted to add something.
Yeah, well, I perfectly agree with what Jim just said. I think that we have a problem with silos. I mean, we tend to think of nails and hammers. No, I mean, as an Air Force officer, I tend to find an Air Force solution for everything. As a Navy officer, they tend to find a Navy solution for everything. And what we need to understand warfare is a very multidisciplinary person with lots of different points of view. We have to take in mind that war is politics. It is not just preparation of weapons. It is not preparation of armies. It is politics. So what is the impact today of the development of state cryptocurrencies? What is the impact today of climate change in the next war, where it is going to happen according to these indications that we have of politics? So the military needs to prepare for the political needs that are going to be present in a few years or in a few months. It doesn't have to predict where the other army is going to be or what it's going to do. We need to be prepared for who is going to be the next enemy, or who's going to be the next adversary, based on politics, probably. And we're a little bit disengaged. The analytical part, the political part, is a little bit disengaged from the operational part. So there needs to be a better link between those two parts, I believe.
I'd like to go back to this analytical part later, but before that, I'd like to ask Monse about data too. In the case of women, you at the end of your presentation, you described the lack of information, the lack of visibility of many women who had taken a part in the army or had an important role in specific conflicts. And there is a common lack of data regarding women's issues in general, but more so in regarding security and defense. In your experience, in your knowledge, is that changing? Are we more aware of the need to gather data regarding, also to differentiate data? As Angel said, you just need a badge with your name. It doesn't matter what your first name is, but are we gathering differentiated data for women and men regarding security and defense, or is it just a wishful thinking?
Well, I'm not an expert in the question about the presence of this matter in our armies. The idea I have about is that societies in general are not working unless maybe in other countries they do. But I think there's a lack of information from the position of women in many fields. For example, this in armies, inside the societies or into the societies. And that is what I think in our army we talk about cultura de guerra, no? It's that culture of war. That it's a strange expression, as I do not understand this idea of culture of war, but culture of self-defense, the culture of how or what can you do to protect your society, to protect your family, to protect your country. This is the idea. And what I know about our army in Spain is that Spain have had a great effort in the 20-30 last years to make visible the position of women in the structures, in the way the European armies are doing so in the same way. But I think the question is not women or men in the armies, but the idea coming back to the points that Angel and Jim have gave us. The idea might be about the lack of resilience. I don't like this word. I know everybody understands it, but it's a strange word to me. The lack of resilience in societies about the defense, and maybe women in this point are prepared. I'm not talking about women soldiers or soldiers that had been women. What is the position of people about this resilience in societies? This is the point, and what women understand they can do inside societies, apart from taking care of people. This is the idea. And of course, feminism has a problem with this point. The traditional feminism and the new ones have a problem with this point, because many feminists do not understand the idea of women as capable of being what they understand is bad people. I don't know if you understand what I mean. I don't mean being in army is bad. Absolutely not. But women that believe they are feminist, they try to give women the idea they are peaceful, they are against all kind of violence, and that is not true. It's on the contrary, is not universal, this behavior in women. And I think armies had understood this point at last, and so there is women are increasing in the service in the armies, but the idea for me is to open the position of women in the defense of the country, but also in the civil services. The civil services that in Spain or any other Mediterranean countries had not been developed in history, because this is a responsibility. And this is, I think, something we have to learn from the Atlantic cultures. We do not have this culture in the Mediterranean one. Well, sorry, Christina, I talk about many different things, maybe.
No, thank you, Monse. You in fact touched upon one major discussion, which leads to another seminar, and that is the next.
It's a very complex question.
Yeah.
To be.
Let me move now, because we already have several questions by the students, and we need to address them. I'm going to read 3 of them, then I will ask you to answer, whoever wants to answer specific questions, and then we'll move through 3 more. Okay, so I hope everyone will have the chance to be heard. Okay, Nathan Morrison asked, how does the intelligence community consider transnational actors, multinationals, criminal organizations, terrorist organizations, and so on, and how do they play into the politics of war? That is one question. Stefania Gonzalez asks, how do defense intelligence and politics manage the potential creation of new conflicts while trying to resolve the already existing ones? Not bad. And the third one is from Salma. Are women more vulnerable than men in situations of conflict? So I'll ask you to, whoever wants to go first, to answer those 3 questions, and then we'll move to the next group. Okay, who wants to go first? Maybe Jim?
Those are great questions, and I really appreciate the students asking them. First, on the transnational actors, and do they how they play into the politics of war? You know, they have well, how to put it? I would say that these transnational actors, criminal organizations, terror organizations, etc., they have played in the past, but I think as we look at looking at the future of war, looking at our current conflicts and how we're structured, these groups are playing an increasing role as we're dealing with this gray zone problem in terms of conflict. Many times, well, I'll give you an example. In Afghanistan, of course, the Taliban received a lot of funding from the drug trade, drug cartels. So that was impacting the allies led by the United States as we were trying to bring stability to Afghanistan. It was tough to deal with the Taliban, who were getting funding from the drug trade. In the United States, of course, as we dealt with the drug trade, we've had to deal with the military. The Navy would go off and would have to intercept ships being brought in from the cartels that had drugs on them, et cetera. So there is and of course the Russians have been using to great success criminal organizations in things that they're trying to do. And I think there's a question later on talking about some of these mercenaries, frankly, that are under the hire of some countries and do the fighting for them. So So yes, they're very much a part of the politics of war, and they're hard to get at because they're not a state. You don't, the state doesn't surrender. A drug organization doesn't sign articles of surrender, and so they're always there. And the tools you have to use aren't necessarily military tools, but are law enforcement tools that are different. And so you get into this gray area conflict, and it's definitely on the rise. So that plays into the politics, and it plays into how one goes about dealing with that form of conflict. Finally, in terms of the this question about how does defense intelligence and politics manage the potential creation of new conflicts while trying to resolve the already existing ones? Well, that's a great question, and that's very difficult. That is what really overwhelms militaries and overwhelms political military problems, is when you have more than one conflict going on, particularly if you have unintentionally caused that second conflict. So trying to come up with courses of action and make recommendations to the president or to whomever in terms of dealing with a problem, you have to make sure that in doing that, you're not causing a secondary problem, a run-on problem there. And so it really is up to the intelligence community. It is up to up to those making political military decisions and making recommendations to the bosses on what to do, is making sure that you are dealing with the political outcome of a decision that might be made, or the military outcome of a decision that might be made, not to have an unintended consequence that makes the situation worse. And those professionals putting together those plans have to make sure, as they lay out the options for the decision maker, that is thought about, because that decision maker, that political appointee, may not know enough and may not have the skill set needed. And so it is up to the intelligence community to keep their analysis, and the political military people to keep their analysis, as well as what they write, to keep that as secure from politics or outside things, so that when they present options to the president, they have taken into account these other problems that could happen, and making sure that the president knows that if you go in this direction, there's some potential unintended consequences that could happen. And so that's very much a part of the role of defense intelligence to be able to do that.
Thank you. Montse, do you want to address the question?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Very briefly. No, I don't think as we can see, because of or coming from the studies, we have women are especially vulnerable in relation with violence in the armed conflicts. Of course, there is the idea they are, and of course, many times they are targeted by, as the civilians are in conflict. But women in armies nowadays are well trained, as men do, and they are not more vulnerable. In fact, this is an resume. Of course, there's not a simple question. It's a very complex question, because we are talking about how they are seen, how the enemy have an interpretation of an army with women, or and of course, I will say, this is student try to read about the case of the Death Battalion I talked about before, because it's very interesting to see the way men were very very often, the Germans were very often with difficulty in these positions with the battalion of death led by Boschkareva. And it's a very, there are many, a lot of information in webs. And I think it's a good case to understand the idea of vulnerability.
Thank you. Angel?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I agree with Jim. The non-state
Sorry.
actors. We are basically no longer in a Westphalian world in which the only actors are states, but still we are making decisions only at the United Nations or dealing among nations. So non-state actors are becoming an increasing part of the game, and I take advantage, as Jim hinted, to answer the question by Marily de Alba. Yes, I believe that private armies, that mercenaries, contractors are going to be growing in the next few years. The role of large corporations is going to be very important in the next few years, especially in the cyber war, in the cognitive war, in social media, for example. And we see how they are playing a very big role in the instability in the last few days or weeks around the inauguration day in the United States, for example. As for how to manage different wars, fortunately, the Western world has been choosing their wars in the last few decades. So it is more of a matter of being efficient in your choosing the right wars than having to cope with two different ones. There is no existential threat today in the wars that we are fighting. So we still have the ability to choose the wars that we fight. As for women, absolutely no. I mean, women in the military, they have different vulnerabilities as men, but they are not more vulnerable. Indeed, they are more vulnerable when they are not in the military in a conflict situation, as Montse was saying, especially because they are targeted in different ways, which are more psychological and have a deeper impact in the society, as women are usually the core of the family and the societies, especially in the rear guard.
Thank you. I'm going to give the floor to Marily de Alba to make her question. Marily, please.
Thank you for the enlightening talk. And Angel Gomez de Agreda answered it a little bit, but my question was as is, will private security and military companies continue to grow and have more power in the future of warfare? So essentially transcending, the nation state system that we have been so accustomed to. I've been studying this topic a little bit for my history of war paper. So if you can enlighten me more, that would be great.
If I may, yeah, I think so. But I don't think that the last part of your question, if they are going to transcend nation-state system, I don't think that today they are going to play a separate role from nations. What we are going to see is more of synergy between private corporations and states in getting a win-win situation for both of them, cooperating. And at the same time, we have gone in the technological world from a primacy of the military in the design, development of inventions towards a primacy of the civilian part. So we are going to be seeing more and more the military relying on civilian companies for the more technological part of war. So we are going to see a blend of them. We're not going to see the states disappear, and we are not going to see private corporations fighting wars on their own, but we are going to be seeing more synergies between both then, I think.
I agree with what Angel said, and I thought I would add an interesting point, and he alluded to this earlier as well. As again, looking at the Capitol Hill situation, social media being used for command and control of the groups, or to organize the groups, or to pass intelligence on between members of these groups that stormed the Capitol, has been fascinating and has added a fascinating bit to looking at the future of warfare or the future of conflict. You know, the idea that the social network and social media like Facebook that was, or any of these other groups that were developed for one whole different reason, is now been hijacked and is being used not just in terms of misinformation and that type of thing, but in this particular instance, actually providing command and control, battlefield intelligence, all this type of thing to people who went into the Capitol. Gives us all now a question that we're going to have to deal with is how do you control that? How do you make sure that this social media isn't hijacked for such horrible reasons, and whether it's hacking an election or invading the Capitol? How do you control that? We have felt for so long that, well, those companies are going to have to do it themselves, and that's proven not to work. So where are your civil liberties in terms of freedom of speech and using these various methods to have, you know, freedom of speech? I mean, I don't have to take up all this time to go into the things that we know we need to deal with, particularly here in the United States, but frankly, all of us do. And so this is something that is new, is not so much the mercenaries like the Wagner group and that coming out of Russia, but these companies set up to trade photographs, you know, between undergraduates or between high school kids, being used instead to trade photographs of the target to be taken by an angry mob. That's a big problem, and so that is something that's new. It won't transcend our nation-state system, but that is something that's going to have a lot of power and influence in the future of warfare, however you might describe that.
Thank you. Now I'm going to ask Sarah Louise and Julian to make their questions, and you can answer whoever wants. Or if you are addressing your question to some specific speaker, please let us know. So Sarah Louise, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you guys so much. This has been really exciting and educational. My question was, what are the dynamics between cyber warfare, the war against terror, which primarily targets what we define as, or like I believe like after 9/11 with George Bush, and noted by the speaker, the clash of wills. Just kind of like, I personally took away from that just kind of how we see clash of civilizations in today's context. And so I just have been grappling with where these ideas come together and was interested in hearing your thoughts.
Julian?
Yes, my question to you, maybe in particular to Mr. Townsend, but to any of the contributors. There's an ongoing trend of building walls in America and also within the EU, meaning that borders are becoming a lot harder than they used to be. Is this merely about the politics of immigration, or is this contributing to deterrence plans that NATO has?
Thank you. There's another question, and I just want to ask Mateo if he wants to go ahead on screen and make it, or we will move with the answers and then go back to your question. Mateo, are you around? I can see you.
Can you see me? And
yes, please go ahead.
Well, I would like to elaborate a bit on that question because I didn't want to, cope all the chat. And the thing is that I'm really interested in how this phenomena of globalization that we have been experiencing, especially after the new technologies that have changed our lives completely. Our daily lives are completely different to our ancestors, and how the declarations of the German philosopher Sloterdijk, who said that networks of communication tended rather to take to conflict rather than promote equality and understanding among all human beings. So I would like to inquire about how this new communication can promote in some way the creation of dangerous organizations such as international terrorism, as we have been with the rise of organizations such as ISIS, or how these facilities to produce propaganda and taking young European people who had no Islamic background to train to Syria and doing such actions against humanity. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Now our speakers have the challenge to answer all these 3 questions in 5 minutes. So who wants to go first?
I'll jump into one. First, in terms of the last point about globalization and communication causing more conflict, I think definitely we are seeing that. Whether you mentioned ISIS and the radicalization of young people, but here in the United States, again, I keep coming back to what we're seeing here. Certainly, domestic conflict in the United States has skyrocketed because the tool of social media and the communications that come with that have organized and helped to solidify the fractures that have always been part of U.S. society. But there's never been a tool that's so organized and so made communications easy among these groups, so that we're now struggling with what to do. How do you counterbalance civil liberties on the one hand with this new technology that's causing fractures to get deeper and more hostile? So you're absolutely right, and I don't know an answer yet. I think no one does. I think we're struggling exactly with that, and you are very right to raise it. There's so many areas in which this has got to be discussed. Last point is that in terms of my colleague who asked the question about NATO and immigration, NATO doesn't get into the borders. they keep out of the politics of whether it's with the European Union and immigration or the United States. NATO has stayed away from that, understanding that with the flow of people come conflict. And NATO is struggling with helping Southern allies deal with the instability that can come with immigration. So that is something to talk about, but the fact of immigration and how nations deal with immigration is something that NATO leaves to the nations or to the European Union to handle. NATO stays out. For the United States, you talked about building walls. Well, as you know, we've got a new president who has now suspended the building of those walls, which is good down on our southern border, but we still have a major problem with immigration legislation and policy, and how do we deal with our southern border in a fair and equitable manner and in humane manner. And that's what the Biden administration is now working on, because we're going to have to go to Congress and get legislation in a very, divided Congress. We're going to have to go and come up with something that will work, because we know building walls does not work. That's it.
Yeah. Just a point about this last question. I think coming from Thomas, or this is student, Mateo. I think it's Mateo. Yes, just remember in a book, maybe Francisco can remember it, a book written by James MacDonald and published I think 5 years ago. The name is, the title is When Globalization Fails. And in this book, they talk about what this student has said to us. When globalization fails in a world with a big interdependence, and it creates a big insecurity, then I think it's a good reading for this student. That's all.
Thank you, Angel, please.
Well, very briefly, Regarding walls, walls are the standard for resistance, not for resilience. So it's the wrong answer to become resilient as a society. The problems that we have are within our societies. So we don't need to protect ourselves from external threats so much as we need to build the resilience inside ourselves to face those threats. So I think that's the first point. The clash of civilizations that someone mentioned, it is no more. I think the clash is within the social systems that we are. There is a clash in between generations, if you want. There is a clash between groups in our social background. There's a clash between the right and the left, the supporters of one team and the supporters of the other, because of the polarization that we are facing. And polarization is in part a consequence of that building walls, of that phase, of that fact that we are building walls, because we are abandoning multipolarity and we're becoming more protectionist. So that polarization has a technological background at the same time, and it is not the only cause, but it is supported by technology, because social media tends in the West to polarize views so as to attract your attention, so as to make it more appealing for you to be there. Whereas in China, it is exactly the opposite. Social media is designed to bring everybody to the center. The center being the Chinese Communist Party. So, as for terrorism and cyber, we have to take into account that there is far more than cyber in cyberspace. So it is not only polarization that we are going to find, there is far more than communications. It is also a building of a space. And my thesis is about that. It is the new ecosystem. It is a hybrid ecosystem that we are building today between the physical world and the cognitive world, the way we understand the world. Until a few years ago, the only way that we had to look at the world was through our senses. Now we have also sensors. The only way we had to make sense of the world was our brains, our intelligence. Now we have external help for that. So it is changing also the way we perceive the world and the way we understand it. Cyber and terrorism, they don't mix together well. Terror needs blood, needs something very tangible, and cyber is exactly the opposite. But cyberspace have three different avenues that it can impact you within cyberspace through hacking your systems, outside cyberspace in the physical world through hacking a nuclear power plant, for example, and in the cognitive world through changing the way you perceive the world. So it is far more complicated than that. And in that third part is where cyber and terror has a lot to do, because terror has also got to do with changing the way you perceive things. They're not trying to kill you one by cutting your throat. They're trying to terrorize thousands, killing one. And that is changing the magnitude of the perceptions that you have. So it is a very wise way to use cyber in terror without using blood, without actually causing any physical harm.
There is a last question, and even if we are off limits, we have already passed our time frame. I'd like to at least to point it out, because it is related to what you just said, Angel. It is about GDPR. Well, it's about data as the food for that cyber power, and about how states and governments can collect or not those data in order to be more powerful in that cyberspace. and the limits to that collection of data that we are imposing because of privacy issues and because of those data being sold to third parties and so on. I know it is a very complex question, and we don't have much time, but if any of you want to say something about the collection of data by the state, what does that mean for us as citizens?
It is a very difficult question, especially because there are two conflicting securities here. There's a social security, a social a community security, and then you have the private security. So what we need to create is a knowledgeable society that can handle the data and can contribute to the welfare of the community, instead of just delegating everything to the state. So we have to become more liberal, if you want, in that sense. Data is not a property. We are very concerned with them stealing our data. Data is not a property, it's identity. The ones and zeros are our flesh and bones in cyberspace. And when someone is collecting your data, it is not taking away something from you. It is taking away your personality. It is taking away your individuality. If we miss that, if we fail to protect the individual, what sense does it make to have a community if we are not individuals ourselves? So we need to find a way to merge those two kinds of security so that we don't lose the individuality, so as to build a community. That will be going to China or going to the Big Brother.
Thank you. Maybe Jim or Monse want to add anything. There is another question. I just told Pablo Santiago, who had posted, that we didn't have the time, but since we are here, I just don't want to let him, at least without making it. And he asked about the threats for our democratic values that internal division creates. Maybe Jim, Monse, you want to address that?
Well, Pablo, I think your question and the one before that about and what Angel was talking about, they're all blend together. It's this idea of these new technologies that are so rapidly being not only improved upon, but being weaponized, if you will, to use that term, for commercial reasons. And I mean, there's a lot of good things that can come from data crunching for systems and to do things more efficiently. But it's this another example of technology. The bad elements of technology overshadowing the good that can come from it and causing us to have threatened our civil liberties. I mean, you raise a very good question, and we're struggling with that in the United States, particularly now. In fact, the New York Times today, in one of its sections, has a big story about facial recognition and how that data of faces is being collected and used. And we're seeing it again with the Capitol as we're looking for those mobsters who came storming into the Capitol. Well, facial data, if you will, data of all types is being used to track these people down. So on the one hand, you can be happy about that. We're going to get these people who came in. But on the other hand, what if I had been standing there taking photographs quite innocently, and now my face is being part of this dragnet, if you will, of data going into law enforcement. So it's a terrible, terrible problem that we have. It's a double-edged sword for this technology, and it's not like we're going to be able to control it without having to give up some sovereignty in terms of civil liberties. And are we really willing to do that? So we've got profound problems that do not have simple solutions. And I wish I could sit here and lay them out, but the only thing I'll say, the final point, is that we have seen in the past where new technologies have scared us and have caused us to wonder about our social, our civil liberties and this type of thing. But as a people or as a community, we've been able to find ways to deal with it. You know, this isn't something new. Each generation has had to grapple with technologies that have scared everyone, but we've dealt with it. And we're just going to have to do the same thing. Our generation, your generation sitting out there, we're going to have to deal with this in the coming years, but we will, but it's going to be hard getting there.
Thank you. Montse, do you want to add anything? You are muted.
Sorry, again, I'm muted. No, just listening at my partners, they have better ideas than me about a question that I must confess is I'm not preoccupied about the question, maybe because it's not a big point in my generation, and I don't feel this is a problem. But I understand what they are telling, and I like the idea of the data are the flesh and bones of our personality in the virtual way. I didn't have thought about it, and I will. I promise you, I will think about it, because I think it's a good point to be thought. Yes. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all. It's been a fascinating session, at least for me. I hope that for you all too. I just want to remind you that we are looking forward to your papers and videos for this competition, because we need your ideas to know how to move forward, to know how to share all these discussions with larger parts of the society, which is much needed. And I also want to invite you to participate, to attend the coming sessions. And you can look at the calendar and you can look at the themes in the S Global page. And now I'm just giving the floor to Francisco for him to close the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cristina, and thank you very much all our guest speaker. It has been a wonderful and very enriching experience. I'm pretty sure that our students have enjoyed and have learned. I took many notes, so we will keep the discussion in our session, because regrettably we don't have much time today. Before we go, I just want to mention a quotation that came to my mind when Mateo posed his question, which is, we all know that no country is far away in the age of airplanes. The necessity for increasing our understanding of others, have their understanding of us, has an urgency that it has never had in the past. This quotation was in the 60s. So we are still on that process of increasing of our understanding of others. And that is why I really love when Cristina explained this event, this possibility, because we all need to talk with each other, to discuss openly, and to try to find new ways to avoid conflict, to avoid friction. Thank you very much, and take care.